Podcast, the show that provides research and statistics about all the Detroit and Michigan sports teams, whether fans like it or not, and detects, exposes, and reveals actual and hidden facts and truth that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no slappiness, no coddling, no pop culture, no conspiracy theories, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Head over to our website, themichigansportstruthpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at Michigan_Truth, and like the show's two Facebook pages, one of them at Michigan Sports Truth, and the other created by the Stables Network. Go to the Stables Network's website, primetimewiththestablesnetwork.com, like the Stables Network on Facebook, and follow it on Twitter and Periscope at Stables Network, and on Instagram at The Stables Network. The Michigan Sports Truth Podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers, nor does it represent or compete against any mainstream media in the state of Michigan. It is also not for entertainment or debating purposes. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them. And it is for every sports fan's own good because the truth is out there.
And I'm Taylor Phillips, along with Ed Smith and Frank Vasner on the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast. Ed Smith, how are we doing tonight?
You know, Taylor, often weeks I would be feeling obviously more jovial, more uplift, more upbeat, more chipper than what I usually am right now. But I think for obvious reasons, you and Frank and everyone listening and that will be listening to this will understand why my tone, why my mood, and why I'm feeling this way right now. So we'll get to that eventually, but it is very good that I am here this evening for sure.
Yep, that's true. Frank, how about you?
Well, just another busy week for me, full week of work, and month of June is here, and just trying to keep my eyes forward and keep focusing on what lies ahead.
Yep. All right. So, got a whole lot of coronavirus to talk, sports news to talk about. By the way, you can follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at DT2Phillips. Follow Ed Smith 313 on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at Ed Smith 313. And he's going to do a Periscope right after tonight's show. Follow his Periscope at Ed Smith 313. And he's going to talk about something that he seriously has to get off his chest. And Frank Vasner on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at Frank_Vasner, VAJCNER, VAJCNER. Again, lots of coronavirus sports news to talk about, plus Dwayne Casey's stand against racism. Got another Dr. Robert Anderson story to cover, plus our Story Vault segment, another one from Jeff Moss about Jim Harbaugh's Purdue ball stuff. But first off, our top story from Deadline Detroit via a source from Violet Economova. Little Caesars Arena headlines LCA, Little Caesars Arena, used by the Ilitch family, I may add, to detain arrested Detroit demonstrators. In Detroit Tuesday night, some protesters were arrested while demonstrating against police brutality were taken to Little Caesars Arena for processing. A photograph began circulating on social media Wednesday of a group that was this morning of a group handcuffed protesters, most of all of them women, standing at a Little Caesars loading dock with Detroit police officers nearby. Little Caesars Arena is operated by the Ilitch organization as we know it today. So the Ilitch family is got to be held accountable for something. With construction partially funded by taxpayers through a tax increment financing structure, public funding amounted to $324 million of the $862 million project. The arena has been idle in recent months as sporting and entertainment events were canceled due to the coronavirus pandemic, including the Red Wings and Pistons games and stay-at-home orders. A legal community source confirmed the action and said those taken to LCA were most likely ticketed and released. Chris Ilitch, who leads the family's businesses, family's businesses, including the Tigers, Red Wings, and Little Caesars Pizza, was among a group of Detroit corporate leaders who spoke against racism and injustice Wednesday morning at City Hall. The group included Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, Bill Ford, executive chairman of Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford Jr., who's still alive and still partially owns the Detroit Lions, by the way, I may add, and others. I love this city, said Chris Ilitch, quote, Ilitch said, quote, I love this city. It's why we've grown our business here. We are proud and privileged to call Detroit home. With that comes a responsibility to lead and uplift the community in times like this, unquote. A spokesman for the Ilitch family's Olympia Development said Police Chief James Craig, quote, requested to use the facility for safety reasons, and we supported his needs, unquote. It's unclear if the city is paying for it. Neither Olympia nor Craig would answer that question. At a Wednesday news conference earlier today, Craig said he was unaware of the details of the arraignment. He said, quote, I don't know how the contact was made, but they certainly agreed to it. We've reached out to other city officials to learn more. Some find it disturbing that a sports and entertainment facility funded with public monies sits idle and is now being used to process people arrested for protesting police brutality. Quote, once envisioned as the centerpiece of a 50-block high-density mixed-use development, the Ilitch's Little Caesars Arena in the district of Detroit is now serving as a facility to detain protesters, wrote the anonymous, unquote, wrote the anonymous author of the Facebook page, The Terrible Ilitches. More than 300 people have been arrested across 5 nights of largely peaceful demonstrators against brutality in Detroit. Protesters have also been processed at the Detroit Detention Center on Mound. Now, guys, this is an issue that is based on the protests and riots regarding the death of George Floyd, which was, I think, last week. Yeah, I believe that was last week. But
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. But Ed, we're going to turn it to you first, and then Frank, you got the details on that. But Ed, fire away, launch the heavy artillery, fire those rockets.
It's not really surprising to hear this news regarding what's going on with Little Caesars Arena, because I think it's quite fitting, because as you have seen, as what we have all seen, what Chris Ilitch has done in the past 3 years, he has done a magnificent job of getting a head start on tarnishing and ruining the reputation and legacy of his father's name. I mean, think about it. And to be honest, if you ask me, he was probably getting a well early head start on that with the Doug Fister deal all those years back after the 2013 ALCS. So that was only an indicator, a harbinger of what was to come under Chris's tenure. And honestly, a lot more people should have seen it coming than originally thought. So, but moving on to that, between obviously what we saw in the HBO report that came out last year, knowing what that funds were going to be used for Little Caesars Arena, that really the public could not have afforded, or really would have needed or necessary to be doing away of, just to fund a damn sports arena. But I get it. I get the reasons why, some of the reasons why it eventually was approved upon. But let's be honest, the Ilitch just had enough money where they could have funded the whole damn thing themselves. Okay. So spare me with that. But not only the fact that now you're all of a sudden using this building, which obviously used all this publicly funded money, and of course with the vision that you gave us at the start of, oh, we're gonna have a vibrant district and all this. Obviously, none of that is nowhere near fulfilled. Now you're using this space, which makes sense since no one else is using it right now at the moment. The Red Wings and Pistons suck. Their seasons were effectively over even before the pandemic hit. So what's the point of using now? But still, like the mere fact that you're using this and the purpose of what's being used for, it's such a dystopic and, quite frankly, a hideous, if not ironic twist of everything around. So whether or not Chris Ilitch approved of this or not, it doesn't matter. This is just a bad look for him, period. And quite frankly, knowing that he is, knowing that the information I do know about him coming out more and more, it's quite easy to see that he's going to be in no short order of time, one of, if not the most disliked sports personality in the entire state, as far as I'm concerned. Certainly in southeastern Michigan and the city of Detroit.
Yeah, that's the way I feel too. Because the moment Frank brought this up to us, I found it very disgusting. And Frank, now you have the details, so just provide them to our audience as best you can. So Frank, go ahead.
Well, my initial reaction is, what the hell's going on here? Because this is not a licensed facility by the Michigan Department of Corrections for holding criminals or prison inmates or anything like that. However, I have been provided with a piece of new information since I have last spoke to you guys, that Michigan Department of Corrections has to do an inspection of any facility to hold inmates, and if Little Caesars passed their inspection, then they could. Now, I don't know if said inspection did take place or not. If it didn't, then obviously shame on Chris Ilitch again. But again, what really gets me is, this is someone who's speaking out against police brutality and racism, yet at the same time, he's allowing his building to be used to house protesters. Now, I also don't know if these were protesters who were protesting peacefully, like they should have been, or if these were violent rioters who were destroying property and trying to cause great bodily harm to other people. I don't know that information. If that was the case, then they probably would have been taken to a much more secure facility. But again, even though they may have been out past curfew, which in that case, they got ticketed and fined. I'm not going to make an issue about that. But when you are going to speak out against something and then at the same time use your facility as a place to process those who are out past curfew, that's not a good look at all. And look, I know there's a story on the Detroit Sports Rag about the rest of the Ilitch children, and I don't get why Chris is any better than any of them. But you know what? We're gonna have to say that for another time in our Story Vault segment.
Yep. And our Story Vault segment this week is not about that, but
Yes.
it's about Jim Harbaugh's Peru ball stuff, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, I'll have to dig up that one Ilitch story about all Ilitch's kids, and we'll have to do that at a later date.
Yes, please do. Anything to add, Ed?
Yes, I would. What Frank, if I could give a sliver of a potential detail to what Frank was talking about in regards to
Please do.
Who exactly was the people that were, if you want to say all purpose intenses, were detained at Little Caesars Arena. It may have been the group of demonstrators and protesters that were essentially assaulted or attacked by officials, law enforcement officials, in a showdown of sorts near Gratiot Avenue around the city's east side. I've been looking about it, searching about it on Twitter. A group of protesters were led one way down Mack Avenue. And by the way, it just so happens that person was a black woman. And then this person, the other person, happens to be a white man. He led another group of protesters or demonstrators down Gratiot Avenue into a confrontation. And one thing led to another. People were attacked. And, well, I won't say attacked, but still, an escalation came about as a result. And the video is there, the tweets are there, the information is there. But long story short, while I think it was something fishy about that regard, about how that situation came about to begin with, it wouldn't surprise me if some of those people that were downtown Little Caesars Arena were from, if not mostly, if not all, were from that group. So Again, nothing official that I can confirm or even speculate upon, but that's just my hunch from what I've been gathering.
So we'll consider this a developing story, and we'll keep an
Yes.
eye on this stuff like that. So yeah, that's all we have for that story. So to the coronavirus headlines we go. First off, Michigan Wolverines football told the freshman class to report to training camp on June 15th. And the NBA, they'll reportedly finalize a plan for a 22-team playoff format with Game 7 of the NBA Finals on October 12th. They include 13 teams in the West and 9 in the East, obviously. I thought there were going to be 11 teams in each conference. But no matter what, the Pistons were going in 12th place, so they'd be eliminated from playoff contention nonetheless. The NHL is going to test players nightly if games resume, which will possibly happen. The NFL teams, including the Lions, won't travel for training camp. They'll stay at their own home training camp sites, such as Allen Park, for example. The MLB teams have agreed to a three division team, but the MLBPA proposed a 114 game season, which was rejected by the team owners, obviously. But MLB proposed a 50 game season with no pay cut, a full prorated share of their salaries, and MLB was considering incentives. The league was going to reportedly consider removing luxury tax, qualifying offer to spur free agency. The NCAA released a plan to help schools bring athletes back to campus during a pandemic. Couple races canceled, the Boston Marathon and the John Deere Classic. And in soccer, the Premier League returns June 17th. And MLS and MLSPA, they had a disagreement on a counter proposal, but now they're going to now the MLS players are going to finalize a deal to help that could make the MLS season either begin or resume. So Ed, we'll start with you, and then we'll turn it over to Frank again. Ed, what are your thoughts on what has happened the past week with the coronavirus sports events?
Well, it shows that we're again slowly but surely making the adjustments that we need to get back towards a similar state of where we were before all this broke out. Just within the past couple of days, not only has Secretary of State offices have been allowed to open back up in the state of Michigan, obviously with certain provisions regarding social distancing and whatnot. But apparently, what was shared with me and with the rest of the group, apparently a report of Governor Gretchen Whitmer lifting her stay-at-home order. So of course that means more restaurants, businesses are going to be reopening as well, which in turn is going to lead to more income, economic outpour, and eventually, of course, sports making a return. So that and obviously with sports betting going on as well, you're going to get that an influx of that being included as well. Didn't surprise me that we're seeing more and more states slowly but surely going into their phases of reopening. Florida was just the first domino. I think obviously with Adam Silver, what he's been able to do again, I have to commend him for keeping as steady and level as possible, recognizing, hey, this is a very serious and unprecedented situation. I thought he worked around it as best as he possibly could. And given that he was dealt a very weird and strange hand, I thought he handled it in the best way possible. And now, granted, it's not a perfect scenario, but again, or a perfect deal, but again, nothing about the scenario is perfect at all. You have to make the best what you do out of the situation at hand. So with Commissioner Silver, getting this type of situation where we can have a schedule, a relatively understandable schedule, where the season's not going to be dragging on too long, but it's going to give players a time to get into the right mindset, focus, shape, and whatnot, so that the real season begins with the playoffs. So I understand that aspect, and what it opens up now when you look at scheduling, potential conflict also with a lot of other sports, including mainly football, both college and the NFL, because when you look at where the NBA Finals is scheduled. It's scheduled potentially for October and could last into, as late as October 12th. So think about what could happen around that weekend if it goes to a Game 7 of the NBA Finals on October 12th. You're dealing with, at that same weekend, massive slew of college football matchups, including Michigan State, for instance. That would be that weekend of that game, believe it or not. So a lot of competition, and of course baseball going on with postseason baseball as well. So that would be quite an interesting thing to see. And again, uh, it's good to see that sports are making a comeback. I think we really need it, especially now, way now more than ever. What we've seen now, not just this past week, but just this past month and the whole year, which is everything that's come about and gone about. So, with the NBA being one of the chief leaders of reigniting, as well as with UFC and WWE, amongst other organizations and sports across the world, in responding to this and restarting and reopening its doors, I think they've handled it as best as they possibly could. So again, kudos, Commissioner Adam Silver.
Yep, absolutely. Congrats to Silver indeed. Frank, what is your justification on all this?
Well, I know Ed and I have said it many a time, but you got to say it again. I have to tip my cap to Adam Silver for having a plan and making sure things go smooth. And we actually do have a date set for the NBA to return to action, and that is July 31st. So that means the resumption of the regular season with the 22 teams. And the reason they actually are more teams in the West is because there's a little bit more of a competition for that last spot. So I think that'll do some good. At least let the teams in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th on down, let them duke it out to be the last team in there. And also going to a 16-team format in the postseason, regardless of conference, which I think is an interesting thing to try. I know in the past, some people say, oh, well, it's going to cause jet lag in the first round if you have, let's say, the Boston Celtics going out to Salt Lake City to play the Utah Jazz. Well, look, have you seen Team Planes, people? They've gotten a lot more amenities. These players aren't flying coach from Boston to Salt Lake anymore or anything like that. So I'm actually really excited to at least get the NBA back, and there's a lot clearer of a timeline. I have heard a report that the NHL is supposed to make an announcement about phase 2 of returning to action. I haven't seen a set date on that yet, but it seems like things are moving along a lot better. Now, as for Major League Baseball, and I don't mean to go from being positive to negative, but I'm really starting to get worried that we may not have a baseball season, because right now it's June 3rd and there's no agreement between the owners and the Players Association as to how long they want to make the season or things like that. But that's not all you have to worry about. This is also the final year of the current collective bargaining agreement. And if this thing keeps dragging out, not only do we lose this season, we very well may not have a season next year as well, and possibly not have any baseball till 2022. Now, you guys probably read a little better than I do, the 94 strike and how much that damaged baseball. Something like this, I think, would basically be a death knell to Major League Baseball in general. And we already saw what a canceled season did to the NHL. This could be a lot worse, and it'll pale in comparison to the 94 strike. And I'll let you guys give your thoughts on that if you can remember back that far.
Ed?
Yeah, I could definitely, even though I was barely a year old when that happened in real time, I've done my research. I've obviously watched footage and reports about it. It was quite unprecedented to see the World Series being canceled, not being played. And that was mainly due to just petulant issues between the owners and the players. Not in this regard of a global pandemic affecting, so again, World Series was still being allowed to play. I think, was it during World War II at least? So the fact that we haven't seen something like this since the '94 strike, or at least in terms of comparison, yeah, I remember how drastic it was. I remember how much of a negative impact it had on the game. It took until until Cal Ripken breaking Lou Gehrig's streak and then the home run race of '98 that really helped rejuvenated the interest of baseball in America.
Yeah, and I remember the '94 strike, and it was a shame they couldn't come to an agreement late of '94, and then they went back to action in 1995. It was a shame that Tigers had were robbed of a chance to win the World Series. But then again, their record probably wasn't good enough, by the way, as I remember that when I was almost a teenager.
Yeah, the Tigers during I don't know if Randy Smith was the GM yet, but this was
He
right
was.
around that. Yeah, okay. So yeah, this is Randy Smith here. So yeah, no, they were horrible. So yeah.
Yeah, just not as terrible as 1996.
Well, that was right around the corner. So
oh yeah, right around the corner. Yeah, they still had Cecil Fielder, Kirk Gibson, Mickey Tettleton, Travis Fryman, Chris Gomez. They had him the first year in '94. He had his first year in the majors with the Tigers in 1994. And when I first experienced something like this, someone getting called up from the minors or something like that, that's when I began to think, who the heck is he? And I don't think he's that good. Maybe he's not. And my dad was telling me when I started to learn that that Gomez was not even ready. When I would prefer Trammell over Gomez because Trammell has is better. Probably had more experience than Gomez at that time. So
now I don't know. I don't know. Now correct me if I'm wrong. Was Luis Gonzalez? I know he was a member of the. Okay, it was '98, so it was after this year. Okay, that answered my question.
Yeah, 1998. Yeah. Yeah, that was and then the Tigers in '99 had Greg Jeffries and stuff. So yeah. But anyway, aside from the non-coronavirus stuff, a special report from Michael Rothstein of ESPN headlining Pistons coach Dwayne Casey says nothing seems to be changing as injustices mount. Detroit Pistons head coach Dwayne Casey lived through desegregation in Kentucky and said he knows what it feels like to go into a new school and unwanted and unwelcome. He has seen the deaths of George Floyd in Minneapolis last week, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, and Breonna Taylor in Kentucky. On Saturday, Casey, who is black, says he wonders if anything has changed from when he was an 8-year-old boy walking into a white school, feeling helpless and unseen, not heard and not understood. By the way, Casey said, quote, 54 years later, my son is now 8 years old. And I look at how the world he is growing up in sight and in growing up in and wonder how much he's really changed. Casey at 63 said in a statement, how often is he judged on sight? Is he growing up in a world where he is seen and heard and understood? Does he feel helpless? Will he be treated like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery? What have we really done in the last 54 years to make his 8-year-old world better than mine was? We all have to be and do better, unquote. Casey said that when he was a child, there was no way to record his treatment because cell phones, cable news, and social media were not yet in existence to show the reality of the situation he lived in. But he knows what he felt then and what he sees now. Casey said in a statement that watching the events following Floyd's death in Minneapolis, a place where he was the head coach from 2005 to 2007, left him understanding how many people could feel the same things, quote, helpless, frustrated, invisible, and angry, unquote. Casey called for real change to how humans view one another as a way to help as protests continue across the country, including in Detroit, and where he now coaches. He said, quote, we have to change the way we see and hear each other in that statement. We have to work together to find solutions to make the justice system just. Black, white, and brown people have to work together to find new answers. The only way we can stop the systemic problems that people of color have faced all our lives is through honesty and transparency. We have to understand why people are at their limit at this moment. It takes empathy in its truest form. It takes a culture shift. It takes action. Let's stop the injustice now. Let's not allow another generation to continue to live in a world where they are treated as unequal. Now is the time for real change, unquote. So, Ed, we'll start with you again, and then I'll pass it to Frank. Ed, justify it as best you can.
Yeah, well, what you were quoting Coach Casey on at the end, it really summed up my thoughts in a more calmer manner, in a more professional manner, in a more dignified manner. Otherwise, if I had the freedom to say what I was felt like saying, it would not be pretty. But knowing the events that have transpired, not just last week and not just last month, or actually, if you think about it, Ahmaud Arbery's murder, it was in February. So it was way earlier this year. It's just now that we found out about it because they had tape coming out in May. But not just this past year, even. We got to go back years and years and years and years and years and years beyond that to see that this is a reoccurring issue. Not just the same topic, but the same situation, the same outcome, the same circumstance, practically every single damn time that you hear about it or read about it, or worst case scenario, often now see or watch about it. For far too long, it is just a constant just heartbreak, agony, confusion, and simmering anger that has been building, and building at these incidents, at these events, and not seeing true justice being done and being served, to a point now people are getting and are now fed up. And this is why you're now seeing, as a result, you're now seeing all this violence, all this devastation, all this destruction. While granted, I'm not agreeing with some, if not most of it, I do understand the reasoning why they're doing it, because people have been calling out for and crying out for and trying to tell and shout and scream out how incredibly messed up our system really is in more ways than one, in all sorts of facets. And they've been trying various ways, various methods to get attention, to get their voice heard. And by the way, we've been trying to do it peacefully too, and people still would not listen. So we figured, hey, if you're not going to listen to us this way, then maybe you'll listen to us that way. And wouldn't you know it, now people want to pay attention. Now people want to start a conversation. Now people want to hear what we got to say. We've been telling you this now for how many years, how many decades, how many centuries now?
A ton.
So what Coach Casey what he had expressed, I'm sure he is not the only man, the only black man, the only black person who has ever gone through or has ever experienced that type of animosity and intimidation in their own life around that time, or even in that area. And by the way, it didn't just have to be in the deep fried South. Oh, no. There's been a lot of instances where even in the ocean breeze, there's been racism as well, okay? Check out Watts. Check out what's been going on within the LAPD from the 60s to now, okay? Check out what was going on. Obviously, what led to the Rodney King riots and whatnot. But yeah, check out all that. You see it's evident there. And speaking on the topic of riots, come on now. We were the trendsetters, 67. Come on, don't forget about here. What was the root of all that as well? Okay, so it is so embedded in our history, in our nation's history. It's not even funny. I wish I could laugh if it wasn't so sad and true of what it was. But the injustices that I've even mentioned or even described, that's just not even a slither of the tip of the iceberg of what we as Black people have gone through and have endured now, officially, you could say, for over 400 years. So while obviously, yes, there has been progress, tremendous progress, there's also been tremendous pushback. And we have seen it time and time and time again, to the point now where, you know, it is almost, it's just wow. You keep thinking to yourself, man, is it ever going to let up? But you see that even in the darkest moments, though, you see why people still haven't given up. You see it resonate in their attitudes of how now younger generations, younger people want to lead that change. Now are starting, hopefully, to understand why the generation before them had their feelings, what they went through, why they are feeling the way they are now. Now it's their turn to experience now and take that baton and be that leader. Maybe this will be that spark that they need. Hopefully, I want to see it. But in terms of just not for what we have to do, but we need more help. It's obvious that the way to advance the progress, you need more help from the right people. And quite frankly, I'll just come out and say it. The more prominent white people and more prominent white athletes come out and speak about and not only denounce, but also denigrate and completely disagree and disavow any and all forms of injustice and systemic racism, then we as a people cannot truly move on. The system cannot change if it doesn't start from within. That is a motto I have believed in that can work in all forms, whether it be business, whether it be personal, whether it be professional or whatever. That that is a true testament in my view, and I think it works in well regard into changing the systems, not just in the criminal justice system, but in terms of education, economics, and healthcare, and so on and so forth. That really deals with race at the root as the root of its problems. Whether people want to talk about them or not, whether they want to admit it or not, it is an uncomfortable and unfortunate truth. It is, in the words of Joe Biden, one of, if not the original sins of our country. So yeah, it may be uncomfortable, but guess what? There's a lot of things in life that are uncomfortable to talk about, but you still got to talk about it anyway. So it's the time has long been past for us to have conversations, thoughtful conversations, and not just conversations, but also conversations that in turn produce the solutions to the problems that we have been seeing for so long, and quite frankly, have gone on for far way too long as well.
Yeah, and that is our mission statement here at the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast. No matter if it's very uncomfortable or not, we talk about it anyway because it's true. It's out there. The truth is out there. Frank, we'll give you just 1 minute, and then we got to. Then I got a couple other articles to read before we get to the closing statement. Frank, 1 minute, go.
Well, all I can say is, wow, I'm not sure how I can follow that up, but I will just say the following. One, racism is not something you're born with. It's taught at home. We as Americans need to teach the future generations that racism is wrong. And
it shouldn't be taught anywhere.
Yes,
it's unacceptable.
It needs to be. It needs.
Well, it needs
to be taught to everyone that it's unacceptable.
Oh,
yeah,
that's right.
That's what I was. Okay. That's what I was getting at, because that's how I was brought up. My family always taught me that it's wrong to judge man or woman by the color of their skin, their religion, or whatever sports team they root for, a bubblegum flavor or anything like that. And also, let me make another thing clear. I don't believe racism is a political issue. This is a moral issue. This shouldn't be based on what political party you align yourself with. We're all human beings, and we all need to unite against something that's wrong, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. I'm a human being, and I'm going to take a stand against racism because I believe it's wrong, and I believe that no matter what origin a person is or whatever skin color they are, they should be treated fairly And I'll even say this because I even have a couple of extended family members who are Black as well, who've married into my extended family. And my cousin Jesse, he's Black, and he and his wife Shannon have recently welcomed a baby girl into the world. And you know what? I hope that their new baby girl, Zuri, and her older sister Zaya can grow up in a world of peace.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And won't we all? We'll all take a stand against racism. So aside from that, we got only a little bit of time left. Got about 15 minutes or so. Developing Dr. Robert Anderson news from Dan Murphy of ESPN at Michigan. Former Michigan Wolverines football tight end Chuck Christian, first named plaintiff in sexual abuse lawsuit. He filed a lawsuit against the university's regents last week, making him the first named plaintiff in the burgeoning legal action regarding the alleged sexual abuse of former team Dr. Robert Anderson. Christian, who played tight end for the Wolverines in the late 1970s and early 1980s, filed his claim in federal court along with two of his former teammates who remain anonymous in the complaint. All three men say that Anderson sexually assaulted during mandatory physical exams while they were members of the football team. The lawsuit says the university showed a, quote, pattern of deliberate indifference, unquote, to warning signs about Anderson's abuse. Multiple former Michigan students say they told coaches and other authority figures on campus about Anderson's abusive conduct. Christian and his teammates joined more than 50 others who have filed anonymous lawsuits this year related to Anderson's abuse. More than 20 others have filed a notice that they intend to take legal action against the school, and hundreds more have retained lawyers but have not yet decided how they will proceed. And it goes on and on and on. So this is more interesting stuff. Let me go back to the Pistons here before we continue on. Former Pistons assistant general manager Malik Rose has left the Pistons organization and accepted a job within the league's front office, the NBA, alongside to work under Commissioner Adam Silver. Now back to this Dr. Robert Anderson developing story. Christian, Chuck Christian, rather. Yeah, that tied in from the late 1970s to early 1980s. Guys, I'm sure you read the article. Ed, we're going to start with you again. Then we turn it over to Frank. Ed, what have you known about all this from the past week?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Taylor, with everything else just keeping my mind and my full attention with regards to the protests, the riots, and everything. The Dr. Anderson newest update, that kind of slipped to the back front. So just in case the rest of the viewers may not be aware, could you fill us in on a few slight details of what this tight end might have been involved with?
Frank? Frank is muted. Hang on a second. Frank? Oh, by the way, we don't have that information as, yeah.
Sorry, Taylor, I had muted myself for a minute, but I was just about to say that I think this is probably the first domino to fall in terms of a named plaintiff coming out in this case, and hopefully it does lead to more coming forward.
Basically, if what I'm hearing is true, then that we're going to see a lot more skeletons being exposed, and really, eventually, because obviously when this whole pandemic clears out, this issue is going to get brought back to the forefront, as it should. You're going to see more attention be brought to it, and really it's going to be the request and demand for more prominent people and certain people to speak up more than they probably would want to. And I'm looking at you, old Captain Khaki Pants. Yeah, I'm looking at you, sir.
Yep. There you go. So, aside from that, head coach Jim Harbaugh attended an anti-police brutality march in Ann Arbor. So, yeah. By the way, our podcast is also streaming live on Spreaker, Periscope, at the Stables at Stables Network and on YouTube as well.
By the way,
nope, it's not.
I was going to say, by the way, before since we're on the subject of old Jimbo, we're getting ready to transition to the last story anyway. I will say this. I give props to Harbaugh because I've known about his views of his stances for quite a while. I remember even 4 years ago, he was there, I think, at a rally, I want to say, for First Lady Michelle Obama. I think that was Michelle Obama's speech he was at. He was clearly in the background. You were able to recognize him with his hat, the glasses, khakis, all that. You've heard his views. He's expressed his own mind and his own voice on social justice and certain social issues. So hearing about this news did not surprise me at all, at the very least bit. So it raises my admiration for the man even more. Yes, he can be kooky, he can be wacky, but there's a reason why he is what he is. And to me, as long as he doesn't get the school in trouble and wins enough football games, and yes, for the love of God, beat Ohio State, I got no problem with the outside stuff. Just do those simple, short things for me, and we're fine. Okay, Jimmy?
Yeah, and that's one thing we agree with Jim Harbaugh on Jim Harbaugh doing something good off the field. So, without all that being said, it's time for our TMSTP Story Vault. From Jeff Moss of the Detroit Sports Rag, what was Jim Harbaugh thinking from August 12th, 2015? This is the Peru ball stuff, so hang on, folks. There are a lot of reasons, Moss writes, there are a lot of reasons that U of M football fans wanted the team of David Brandon and Brady Hoke replaced with just about any other athletic director in the world and Jim Harbaugh. That includes Ward Manuel nowadays. Our partial list includes the horrible quality of play on the field, becoming the gimp to both Ohio State and Michigan State, and the commercialization of Michigan Stadium and the program in general, not to mention skywriting planes and fireworks, but no single event galvanized both the alumni and Wolverine supporters like the fallout from quarterback Shane Morse's brain injury during the September 27th, 2014 loss at the hands of the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And based on how the U of M fan base reacts to this article, you will know once and for all if Michigan fans really cared about the health of Morse, or if they were just using the issue as leverage to march on Brandon's house and call for his immediate dismissal. Do you people really worry about degenerative brain disease, or did you just use that issue as a poker chip to get rid of someone you despise? Because what I'm about to write over the next few paragraphs is just as disturbing as the flippant response of Hoke and Brandon to Morse's remaining in the game after suffering an obvious head injury. The Detroit Sports Rag has learned that some disturbing events took place during the U of M football sponsor Exposure U camp that took place in the middle of June, the first such program run by the Messiah Harbaugh himself in Ann Arbor. If you aren't familiar with Exposure U, here's information about the camp from the MGO Blue website. Exposure U, high school campus for players entering 9th through 12th grade in the fall of 2015 and graduating seniors who are looking to compete against other athletes, including it's improve their technique and understanding on the game. The game, the camp will be highly competitive, enjoyable, and a tremendous football experience for all participants. Now, this camp has been going on since the 70s when it was created by Bo Schembechler. For decades, it has been run by U of M coaches like Hoke and Lloyd Carr. Local high school coaches participate in this camp as well. A mixture of coaches and staffers in attendance at Exposure U became extremely disillusioned with how Harbaugh ran his inaugural camp. One source informed us that one of the key components of the camp was drastically altered this summer, and not for the better. In the past, at the end of the day's program, the teenagers the teenagers would partake in a free-form, non-padded, throw-heavy form of Air Force football. This was supposed to be both a fun event for the kids and a way for the coaches in attendance to judge raw talent with minimal physical risk to the high school students. Just imagine basic recess ball with one quarterback and one center who would then become an eligible receiver after snapping the ball. This laid-back middle school type of game included no downs or stoppages of play. There would be a throw off instead of a kickoff. Kids would get a little dinged up at times, but there was no tackling or full speed head-on contact and no serious injuries and all that stuff. Then this Peru ball stuff, the goal is to run the ball between two cones in the end zone, no pads with helmets, 11 on 11. Harbaugh came up with this game out of necessity in a poor area of Peru where kids couldn't afford any sort of expensive equipment and stuff like that. So it's a very long article. I don't have enough time to read through the whole thing. So we got 5 minutes left on this one. So Ed and Frank, I'll give you 1 minute each, and then we'll go to the closing statement. Ed, 1 minute, go.
Yeah, in light of knowing this is still on the heels of the Shane Morris incident. So this is probably one of the very lone few issues where I was really irritated at Harbaugh with. I was very thankful that this article came out because people need to know. I'm glad it did come out because obviously we haven't seen him practice this or do this yet since. It was stupid then. It's stupid to read about it now, and it could have led to something even far more dangerous and devastating than just what happened to Shane Morris. So, yeah, I'm glad this article came out when it did.
Yep. Thanks to Moss. Frank, I'll give you just 1 minute. Go.
Well, they say timing is everything, and this article did come out in a good time. And I guess since then, Harbaugh has not done Peru ball at any of his camps since this came out. So, I mean, I wish he wouldn't have done it in the first place, but at least he kind of came to his senses and didn't end up getting wrist hit with huge lawsuits and getting fired. And now all he has to worry about is winning games and beating Ohio State and getting to Indianapolis.
Yep, there you go. And that's one thing Harbaugh has to do first is beat the Buckeyes. So our closing segment, Ed, I'll give you a 1 minute each. Ed and Frank. Ed, closing statement, go.
Man, I wish I had more than 1 minute to discuss what I was wanting to say, but in terms of what we all have seen in terms of reaction to what's going on, I appreciate the fact that prominent white people and prominent white athletes from all forms and mediums are voicing their opinions, voicing their support, showing in certain ways their solidarity. But we need to do more. We need to see more. Don't just talk about it, be about it. Donate, contribute, go to causes, go to the streets, go to the people, talk with them, to get as better of an understanding as you possibly can. So that way we don't see, even if we do see another situation, well, what happened to George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Trayvon Martin or Mike Brown or Philando Castile or Freddie Gray or Sandra Bland or Tamir Rice or Eric LeGrand or Stephon Clark or Breonna Taylor, the list goes on and on and on. Even and when this does happen again, let's have a better response to what's going on and also a better demand that justice be better served than what is usually done.
Absolutely. Yes, let's do that. Frank, I'll give you 30 seconds. Closing statement, go.
I'll borrow a quote that I've seen this week, and it goes as follows. I know I'll never understand. However, I'll stand with you. That's a message to all of my friends who are Black and anyone else listening. I may not understand what situations you may be going through, but I'll stand with you and have your back.
All right. My closing statement, there has to be a federal law against racism. Racism must end in not only in somehow, but by all means necessary, it has to end. Any racism that continues is grounds for a felony and maybe life in prison. or at least it should be. So, guys, excellent job, Ed Smith. We'll see you on Periscope right after this. If there's any local or national business that is interested in sponsoring the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on the Stables Network, please contact the network executive producer, Mark Mancini, by email at mancinisports@yahoo.com, or our operations producer, Breck Smith at thestablesnetwork.com. We'll be back next week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, right now, go to Ed Smith's Periscope at EdSmith313. Thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing. And remember, the truth is out there. TTFN, tots off for now. Bon appetit. Hit them with a hind. We rest our case. Stay safe.